It's my pleasure to introduce our clinician for the evening, Pierre Oliver. Many of you probably know Pierre by name. Pierre runs Yarmouth Model Works, a manufacturer of resin freight car kits and photo etched detail parts. YMW Model U, North American importer of Model U 3D printed figures, and until recently, Elgin Car Shops, a custom builder of resin freight cars. Pierre is a lifelong modeler who has also written a few articles for RMC and was featured in a number of how-to videos on Trainmasters TV. Pierre currently models the Clovis branch of the Southern Pacific and occasionally travels to Germany to participate in Fremo meets. So Pierre, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to share your screen.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. This isn't going to be very long. It's because actually it's not that really complicated, I find. Um, as Mark said, we're just going to talk about painting 3D printed model figures. There we go. As he says, you can find my websites. One here is at Yarmouth Model Works, where I have my HO scale, resin freight car kits, and my various photo etched details. I did do one O scale kit. Penzi X31 was very successful. I'm still arguing with myself about doing more O scale in the future. And then the figures are available here at YMW hyphen Model U. I started selling these or bringing them in because I was introduced to them by a friend of mine. And it was at his suggestion because the quality of these figures dovetails really nicely with the high quality of the details that I like to offer for freight car detailing and such. Um, the American style figures that are on my website are but a small fraction of everything that Model U offers. They have a huge European selection of across a whole variety of eras. Um, and I've used them to populate portions of my layout. One of the things I really like about these Model U figures is the fact that they have texture, uh, they have wrinkles, they have folds. They're not just amorphous blobs, which actually makes them much easier to paint as well. Um, and the poses are all very natural, yet remaining somewhat dynamic. You don't have that famous prizer figure of the guy running down the station platform, frozen in time. Um, but to to paint these things, it's really not that difficult. There's just a few supplies you're going to need. First thing is a wet palette, and what this really is it's a it's a plastic tray with a sponge in it and some special treated paper that goes on top of the wet sponge. And what it does is it keeps your acrylic paints wet. They won't dry out on you quickly. And it allows you to blend colors or mix colors right there on the palette with just using your brush or a stick or whatever. Um, and you can just play around with your various colors. They're really useful. And you can, in fact, you can dispense a little bit of paint on the paper, cover the thing up, and the paint will still be usable the next day. That's part of the beauty of these things. You can get these things at Michael's or Amazon. Uh, I $30, I think it is. I can't remember because it's been a while since I had to buy one. Other thing you're going to want is some good brushes. Now, that God hand brush, for example, which is the finest brush that I've got, that's about a $20 brush, but it will last your lifetime if you take care of it properly. The other two that I use that you see there are from Michigan Toy Soldier, that's a hobby shop in Detroit, which does a great mail order business, and they have a terrifying array of supplies for paints, tools, figures. They're more oriented towards military modelers and such, but there's a tremendous pile of resources in there for people who want to just paint stuff. So I'm finding it harder and harder to find supplies like we used to find in the hobby shops 30 years ago at the model railroad shops. They're more into ready to run and stuff. So I'm spending more time in alternative hobby shops, I guess is the best way to put it. Now we get to talk about paint. Um, I learned to paint with flow quill and scale coat. I can put scale coat or original flow quill down on a plastic model without barrier and not craze the plastic because I know how to do it. That's how long I've been working with this stuff. When acrylics first came out, I had nothing but trouble with it. In fact, I swore at it more than anything else until this particular line of paint, this AK Interactive Generation 3, these particular bottles. This is the first acrylic paint that I've encountered that does everything it's supposed to do. It handles well, it'll brush well, it'll airbrush well. Every color has the same consistency, unlike what I found with Vallejo, where every color is to thin it, every color requires a different ratio of thinner. The Gen 3 stuff, really friendly, user friendly. The other advantage for them is, for model railroaders perspective, there's at least a dozen red browns in their paint line, which none of the other paint manufacturers seem to be able to doing. They're doing more greens and blues, etc. But for our purposes, red browns are really useful. One of the other nice things about this acrylic is it does dry quickly, but when it dries, it will be resistant to itself. Unlike, say, Tamiya paint, where you can airbrush something or brush paint something, come back a week later and try to brush paint over top of it, and it will lift the underlying coat of paint. That is a design flaw, as I call it, in Tamiya paint and in Mr. Color. A lot of these hybrid lacquer acrylic paints, they are not impervious to their own thinner, but this Gen 3 stuff is just a treat to work with. And of course, we're going to want some of this tomato liquid primer. I don't use the spray cans, because I find it wasteful and expensive. These little bottles will go a long way. And the other reason I don't use the aerosols here is because recently Tamiya aerosols have been banned in Canada because of a chemical issue with them. I'm not sure what's going on with it. They may or may not be changing their chemical mix, but we can't get the aerosols anymore in Canada, but that's fine. Doesn't bother me. I use my airbrush for that. Um, the figures, when you get them, you can see the little white spots that are on that figure. Those are the attachment points for the support material. They'll get cleaned off just with a sharp knife, maybe a little bit of scraping. And then they don't necessarily need to, but I like to give them a wash and then stick a pin in the guy's heel just so I've got something to hang on to. And then a quick coat of primer just to give us something to work with. Now, some of these upcoming photos, they're going to be a little blurry because I ran out of hands trying to hold the figure, hold the paintbrush, and hold the camera. So I apologize in advance for that. But so when we get going here with our wet palette, and you can see I've dispensed an off-white and a dark brown, and I just put a little puddle of each, and then I can just grab it, a little bit of each, stir it up, and make sort of a custom color, whatever I want to see happen there. Um, and once I'm happy with it, I can start applying it, just block in the color on this guy's pants, and then I'll do the same thing with the blue to make a faded denim. And then there's again with the ochre to make a shirt. And as I say, I'm sorry about the focus on that. But we can start playing around with that. By doing it this way with the wet palette, every color, I can do six figures and everyone's got a slightly different tone, which is important, I feel. So we don't have monotony or monochromatic effects here. We get variations and fading, etc. And just continue adding in the color as need be. Um, I grabbed the other guy and I did the opposite. Instead of gray pants, blue pants. Instead of denim jacket, gray jacket. But you see, it takes almost as long to do as it takes for me to describe to you here. in these HO scale figures. The flesh is a little trickier because flesh tones in the paint lines, some of them are really bizarre, some of them are orange, some of them are really pink. So you can play around with a couple of them on the wet palette, get the tone that you're happy with. And at this point, these guys are almost done. And there's the secret weapon for for me anyway, in HO scale, is this Tamiya panel liner. It's really all it is. It's just an enamel wash. But when we flow it over the model, you can see it's a little shiny there. But once it dries, all of a sudden, it's gone into the recesses and the crevices, and it's created shadows where you're supposed to get them, as well as it kind of makes the guys look a little dirty. And that's the process that I use for doing HO scale figures. It's really fast, um, and you're limited basically by your imagination and what you've got for your color palette. Now, what you can do in larger scales, because you can see it, like on an O scale figure, you can start really getting in and doing the highlights and the shadows in the crevices and in the high points. So again, we'll do much the similar process, the blue and the brown and the gray, mixing them up, a pretty faded blue there being made. And again, I just start blocking in the color and working on his pants and his gloves and such. But what I'm also doing is I'm working and while the paint is still a little wet, I'm going to try and blend or lift off some of it to get the gray to come through to really make that jacket look faded. And then with the flesh tones, you'll note I've got the basic tone, and then below it, it's a little darker, and then off to the right, it's a little darker again. And literally, so I'll put on get the base color on the guy's face. I've adjusted the color tone to what I think is looking a little better. But then I took some of that and lightened it. You can see that just to the left to try and get a lighter tone. And then that goes down like on the point of the chin, on the cheek, the tops of the cheekbones, and down, excuse me, the bridge of the nose. And then just with a wet brush, just blend that in a little better. And all of a sudden, that face, the depth and details in that face will really pop out. And you can do the same thing with a fine brush and the darker tone in the eye sockets and in the lips and under the chin. And it's really not that hard to do with a little bit of practice. And the nice thing, again, if you try it and you're not happy with it, you can just paint over it and try again. Um, and there's the fellow, the O scale figure with some of the brown wash on him again. Um, I I'm able to do eyeballs in 1/35th scale, but I'm not going to try and do eyeballs in 1/48 scale. That's pushing it at
Mhm.
this point in my life. Um, and there's the backside of the guy. He's, nice and dirty. He does look like he's just finished a nice long run behind a steam engine. And that's pretty well it. This is some of the supplies that I've used. The paint storage racks in particular, I was asked about when we first did a dry run on this. This system here that through Hobby Zone, he's got dozens of little uh, CNC cut racking systems for all kinds of paints and tools, etc. If you're trying to find a place to put stuff on your workbench, I would really recommend looking at their options. And that's what I've got for you, gentlemen. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. That was great. Nice rundown. I have a question. When you're mixing your paints, can you mix Vallejo with the AC or the AK?
Probably it's not something I'm prepared to try. One of the
Uh-huh.
things that I found that finally got me around to getting the various acrylics to work was to use the proprietary thinners when I'm thinning it for airbrushing, like AK's thinner for their acrylics, Vallejo's thinner for their acrylics, Mr. Color's thinners for his other, they all say they're generic, but everybody's slightly different. So I'm reticent to mix and match in that matter.
Okay. Um, Ron Jensen said, can Model U offer American locomotive crews with 1920s to 1930s clothing and hats, i.e., prior to the transitional 1940, 1970 era offerings?
I'm sure they can. The problem with Model U right now, I've been waiting for them for 2 years now to do railway porters for me
Hmm.
and iStack operators, workers, pardon me. Um, they're stupid busy over there. And hopefully he'll get around to it. But the thing to remember, the way they make these figures is they hire people and put them in appropriate costumes and scan them.
Uh,
And they have a, it's like a giant phone booth type scanner, which is one of the reasons why their figures come out so good. So I keep bugging them. Hopefully one day.
Good. Bill Hobbs says, eyeballs, why bother? Just remember Little Orphan Annie. Um, Eldon Jacobson, should the figures be washed before painting?
Yes.
Okay. And on that subject, did you airbrush the primer or paint it?
Yes. No, I airbrushed.
Okay. Bill Curran says, does the panel line react with any paints? I've heard that it had reactions to some bare plastics.
I'd be really, it's an enamel, so I can't imagine that it would.
Yeah, I've used it and I've never had a problem so far. Steve Hollenbeck says, great presentation. Your figures look more realistic than the others I've seen. Jack
And that's
Sweeney.
why and that's why I picked up the line and
Mhm,
brought it in because they were so good.
yeah. Jack Sweeney said, have you tried other figures, i.e. Rusty Rail?
No.
Okay. That's it for the questions, Pierre. Thanks again for a great presentation.